I knew something was wrong the moment she started locking her phone screen the second I walked into the room. At first, I brushed it off. People value their privacy, and we were both professionals with demanding jobs. But there's a difference between privacy and secrecy, and lately the line had blurred into something I couldn't ignore. It began with the late nights. She said she was staying behind at the office to prep for the promotion cycle, that this quarter's pitch to leadership could make or break her future. I supported her, of course. I brought her takeout, waited up for her to come home, reassured her that her hard work would pay off. But what I didn't say was that her whole demeanor had changed. She wasn't just tired, she was distant, mechanical. Her hugs became brief, her eyes never fully met mine, and her laughter, what used to be spontaneous, now felt rehearsed. Then, one night, I was sitting at our kitchen table, cleaning out the shared family iPad, when I noticed a notification from a work app she rarely used at home. Slack. I wasn't trying to snoop, but it popped up and I instinctively opened it, thinking it was mine. That's when I saw the message, same time after the review session? Your office or mine? I froze. It was from someone tagged as Exec Lead M. I shouldn't have kept reading. But I did. What followed wasn't just flirtation, it was familiarity. References to past encounters, inside jokes that clearly weren't about spreadsheets or sales metrics. At one point, he wrote, "Can't wait to see you light up that room tomorrow. HR's going to eat out of your hand. But I know what you really want." And she replied, "You. Promotion's just a bonus." I stared at the screen, the air in the room thickening. I'd never felt betrayal like that. Not anger, not yet. Just this cold stillness, like the silence before a storm. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't confront her. I simply put the iPad back on the counter and stared at the fridge door for 20 minutes before heading to bed. Over the next few days, I started collecting pieces. Not for revenge, not at first. Just clarity. I watched her speak excitedly on the phone in the other room, talking about an HR panel and how she was on the short list for promotion to a lead role. She said she'd worked for it. Deserved it. And that might have been true once. But now I couldn't tell where merit ended and manipulation began. One thing I knew, she was scheduled to present at the quarterly leadership review in front of the entire executive team. And sitting at that table would be the same man who thought it was fun to joke about giving her both the title and the treatment. What they didn't know, however, was that she had made one mistake. Her Slack account was still synced on the shared iPad. So I started archiving. Quietly, methodically. Screenshots of every flirtatious message. Every suggestive emoji. Every reference to time spent together that had nothing to do with business. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I simply built a folder, labeled it Performance Review, Supporting Docs, and uploaded it to a private drive. The night before her big presentation, she was glowing. Literally glowing. She wore the same perfume she used on our anniversary. Irony is cruel. She stood in the mirror, practicing her smile, rehearsing lines about transparency and leadership integrity. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed, listening silently as she tried out different ways to sound humble but strong. She turned to me suddenly and asked, "How do I look?" I smiled. "You look ready." And she was. Ready for something. Just not what she thought. The next morning, she left the apartment before sunrise. I pretended to still be asleep when she kissed me on the forehead, light, practiced, almost ceremonial. I listened to her heels clicking down the hallway, the soft beep of the elevator, and then the silence that followed. It was strange how final it felt, like a curtain closing on a performance neither of us agreed to attend. I got up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the shared drive I had set up the week before. The folder was there. All the screenshots with timestamps, message chains, even the blurred video thumbnail that had autoplayed one night when the iPad picked up their call by mistake. Nothing graphic, but enough to paint the picture clearly. Enough for any professional to raise both eyebrows and questions. The HR department had an open submission portal for additional presentation materials for the leadership meeting. It was a simple form. Upload document. Provide context. Optional note. I uploaded the file, didn't add a comment, and hit send. It was out of my hands now. I felt no victory. Just silence. I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted her to see what she'd become. I wanted someone in that room, someone with power, to witness the same transformation I had over the past 3 months. Maybe then they'd stop handing out promotions to people who knew how to smile but had long forgotten how to mean it. She messaged me just before noon. "Big day. Wish me luck." I replied, "Good luck. You deserve what's coming." She texted back a heart emoji. Around 2 p.m. I got a message from a friend who worked in the HR team, not someone I was particularly close to, but someone who owed me a favor from years ago when I helped him through a difficult breakup. His message was brief: "Are you the one who submitted the chat log this morning?" I didn't answer. He didn't ask again. But what he sent after made my stomach twist, not from nerves but from the slow, cold confirmation that my silence had spoken louder than I ever could have with confrontation. He wrote, "They paused the panel after the first 2 slides. The exec team left the room. She hasn't come back to her seat yet." I stared at that message for nearly 5 minutes. Then I turned off my phone and went for a walk. The city felt louder than usual. The traffic more chaotic, the sidewalks more crowded. And yet I felt outside of it all, moving through a world that had shifted without asking me first. I didn't know what would happen next. Maybe she'd be reprimanded quietly, swept under the rug. Maybe HR would call it a personal matter and let it go with a warning. Or maybe, just maybe, someone would look at those messages and ask the same question I had been asking myself for weeks: how long had she been lying? When I returned home that evening, she was already there, earlier than usual. She sat on the couch, still in her work clothes, makeup smudged like she'd rubbed her eyes too hard. She looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, part confusion, part dread, and a hint of something else. Resentment, maybe? She opened her mouth to speak, but I beat her to it. "How did the presentation go?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "It got rescheduled." I nodded. "Unusual. I thought everything was finalized." She stared at me like she was searching for a clue. "Did you?" she started, but couldn't finish the sentence. "I what?" I asked, slowly sitting across from her. She blinked twice, then shook her head. "Nothing. It's just been a weird day." "Yeah," I said, meeting her eyes now. "Sometimes days turn out different than we expect." She didn't eat dinner that night. Just sat in silence, scrolling her phone, then turning it off and staring at the black screen. I didn't ask questions. I didn't offer comfort. And I didn't lie, not the way she had, at least. That night, as she turned over in bed facing the wall, I lay on my back staring at the ceiling. She didn't say goodnight. Neither did I. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't drag us back into a performance I no longer wanted to be part of. I had pulled the curtain. Now we waited to see who would dare peek behind it. The next few days passed in an awkward choreography of silence and half-spoken sentences. She didn't bring up the meeting again, and I didn't press. But something had changed. Her confidence had cracked. She still dressed for work each morning with the same precision, still packed her laptop and notebook, but the sparkle in her step was gone. She moved more carefully now, like someone walking across glass, unsure which step would make everything shatter. At one point, I heard her on a hushed call in the living room late at night. I didn't eavesdrop, but I caught enough to know the fallout had begun. "No, I don't know who sent it. Yes, it was real. No, I didn't think it would." And then a pause. A long one. Followed by, "What do you mean, under review?" I earned that spot. I heard the shake in her voice, fragile, unfamiliar. The next morning, she left without speaking a word to me. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was watching the unraveling of something I used to believe was solid. The kind of erosion you don't notice at first until one day the entire foundation crumbles under your feet and you realize you've been living in ruins for months. Maybe longer. Midweek, I got a call from someone unexpected. One of the junior managers at her company. We'd met once at a holiday dinner, exchanged polite smiles and nothing more. He introduced himself again, apologized for the intrusion, and then hesitated. "I know this is awkward," he began, "but, well, there's a lot going around the office. People talk. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for whatever part one played in helping cover for them." I was silent. He added, "A few of us suspected something. The way he always scheduled late sessions with her, the closed-door meetings. But it wasn't our place to ask. Now that it's all coming out, I just thought someone should say it." I thanked him. Politely. Briefly. And hung up. That was the first moment I realized this wasn't just about betrayal, it was about exposure. This woman I had built a life with, supported through stress, cheered on through promotions, defended in front of my own friends when they raised eyebrows, she had become someone I no longer recognized. And the walls that had protected her narrative were cracking, piece by piece. Later that evening, I noticed she had cleared her browsing history on the shared tablet. Subtle but deliberate. She was trying to control the damage, erase the evidence, not realizing that the people she needed to convince weren't here at home. I wasn't her audience anymore. Then came the email. It was forwarded to me anonymously, likely from someone inside HR. No name, no signature. Just a message thread between the executive team titled, "Regarding Leadership Nomination Concerns." It was short, formal. But in those few lines, the tone was unmistakable. It read, "After review of the submitted material and internal inquiry, we are suspending the candidate's eligibility for this quarter's leadership nomination pending further investigation into policy violations and conduct breaches. Additional steps may be taken pending further findings." Attached was a redacted version of the screenshots I had submitted, cleaned up, with names blurred but the message content intact. Even without identities, the implication was undeniable. And if that memo had been circulated among upper management, the damage was already done. She hadn't just lost her shot at promotion. She'd become a case study. She came home unusually early that night. Her eyes were red, not from crying, but from exhaustion. That kind of deep, soul-level weariness you can't fake. She didn't speak when she walked in, just dropped her keys into the bowl by the door and sank onto the couch. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Eventually, she looked at me and whispered, "You did it, didn't you?" I met her gaze. "Did what?" "The submission. The screenshots. You sent them." I didn't confirm. I didn't deny it either. I just held her stare and waited. "You humiliated me," she said, her voice cracking. "No," I replied calmly. "You humiliated yourself. I just stopped covering for you." She looked away. For the first time in weeks, I saw the person she used to be flicker across her face. The one who laughed with me at midnight over burnt toast. The one who once said loyalty was her highest value. But that version of her was buried too deep beneath what she'd become. That night, we slept in separate rooms. Not because we said anything final, but because the silence between us had become its own language, cold, precise, irreversible. By the following week, the house had become little more than a quiet battleground, no arguments, no yelling, just the tense choreography of two people trying not to occupy the same square of floor for longer than necessary. She started coming home later, claiming she was working with HR to clear everything up, but the weariness in her face told a different story. Her work laptop, once proudly perched on the dining table as she stayed up late crafting presentations, now remained zipped in her bag. She barely looked at it, let alone touched it. The ambition that once radiated from her was gone, dampened, subdued, maybe even ashamed. I didn't ask for updates. I wasn't curious anymore. Some part of me, the part that still remembered what we used to be, might have hoped she'd take accountability. That she'd sit me down, admit what had happened, not as a strategy to save her job, but as a moment of truth between two people who once made promises under softer lights. But she never did. Not once. Every conversation was a deflection. Every attempt at emotion felt rehearsed, like she was trying out lines for a role she no longer understood. One evening, as I returned from work, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed with a manila envelope in her hands. She didn't look up when I entered. Just said, "They've suspended me. No pay. Pending formal review." Her voice was flat. Not angry. Not tearful. Just resigned. She held the envelope out toward me. "You want to see it?" I shook my head. "There's nothing in there I don't already know." She set the envelope down, exhaled, and for the first time in a long while, looked at me with something resembling vulnerability. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "No," I said. "It wasn't. You think I'm a monster, don't you?" I paused. Not because I was unsure of the answer, but because I knew how much the truth would sting. "I think you made yourself into someone I can't trust. And I think you stopped seeing me as part of your story long before any of this happened." She nodded slowly. There were no tears. Just silence. I left the room not out of spite, but because there was nothing else to give her. And I think in that moment she finally realized it too. The following day, I made a decision I had been circling for weeks. I didn't announce it, I didn't make a scene, I simply packed a bag, emailed a few local property agents, and scheduled a temporary rental downtown. I left a note on the counter, "This isn't revenge. It's release. I hope someday you understand the difference." I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't even look back. For the next several nights, I stayed in a quiet one-bedroom with a view of the river. Nothing fancy. Just enough distance from what used to be. I turned off notifications. Left most of my clothes behind. I needed space, not from her, necessarily, but from the man I'd become while trying to hold together something that had already fallen apart. It's strange how quickly the world feels different when you remove yourself from a lie. Food tastes sharper. Music feels louder. Even the silence becomes comforting instead of suffocating. And in that quiet, I realized that the betrayal I felt wasn't just about the affair. It was about watching someone I loved become unrecognizable and pretending not to notice because it was easier than admitting the truth. A week later, I received one final message from her. No subject line. Just a single sentence, "They let me go." No emojis. No punctuation. Just the end of something she'd once told me was her entire purpose. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The days that followed were still, quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. I kept expecting some wave of regret or guilt to rise up in me, something to make me second-guess the choices I'd made, but it never came. What I felt instead was clarity. Peace. Not the kind that bursts in with fanfare, but the slow, steady kind that arrives when you finally stop gaslighting yourself about what love should look like. I had spent too long justifying distance as independence, deflecting intuition as paranoia, rewriting moments in my head to preserve a version of her that didn't exist anymore. Now that the illusion was gone, all that remained was the truth, and I could breathe inside it. I started rebuilding. Not out of vengeance, not to prove anything. Just quietly for myself. I returned to hobbies I'd shelved, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in months, started taking long walks without looking at my phone. It wasn't dramatic, and it didn't need to be. Healing, I was learning, rarely is. It's made of small moments. The first cup of coffee without the heaviness in your chest. The first night of uninterrupted sleep. The first laugh that doesn't feel like borrowed joy. She reached out a few more times. Once to ask if I'd be willing to talk, just to clear the air. Another time to say she missed me. And finally a message that just said, I don't know who I am anymore. That one sat in my inbox unread for hours. I hovered over it, heart steady, fingers still. Then I closed the app. Not because I didn't care, but because I did once. And that part of me deserved to be let go with dignity. A few weeks later, I heard through mutual connections that she had moved out of the city. Left the company completely. No public fallout, no headlines. Just faded away quietly. Like a name whispered in a room where no one's listening anymore. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her pain. But I didn't wish her back either. She'd made her choices. And for a long time, I'd lived in the wreckage of those choices, building walls to keep from admitting how much they hurt. But now I was done patching someone else's storm. I was living again, not just existing between apologies and red flags. I didn't need to watch her fall. I didn't need revenge. The silence that followed was enough. It said everything she never did. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: not all endings need to be loud to be final. Sometimes the quietest exits are the ones that echo the longest. If you've ever been lied to, ignored, or made to feel like the backup in your own relationship, know this: your silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's the sharpest form of truth. And if this story felt like your story, if it reminded you of something you've lived through or helped you see things more clearly, drop a comment below. Let someone else know they're not alone. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories like this, raw, real, and unfiltered, coming soon.